Today's guest is an author and UFO researcher from the UK with a passion for aviation. He's written 4 books on the topic of UFOs, with a fair few others covering aviation history. Please give a massive Koit welcome to Graeme Rendall. Hello Graeme, and welcome to KoitCast.
Hello there, how are you doing?
I'm doing super lush, and I hope you are too.
Yeah.
First off, thank you for coming. Your time is much appreciated. I'm going to start with, in your own words, who are you, where are you from, what do you do, all that good stuff.
So I'm Graeme Rendall. I'm an author who writes about UFO and aviation topics. I've been interested in both of those since childhood, basically. So you're looking at 50 years almost for the UFO side and 50 years for the aviation side. I'm reasonably well read on both subjects. I've written 4 books now on the UFO topic, a few more on that on the aviation side of things, and both the aviation, the UFO, and World War II interests I have all came together with my interest in the Foo Fighters, which was the first UFO book I released back in 2021.
Super ace. Great ground in there, so I appreciate that. Can you tell me what brought you into the paranormal theatre? I.e., what was your introduction story, your origin story, if you will?
I have to blame my mother. I was reading science fiction when I was 8 or 9 years old, so I was reading Isaac Asimov books with a nice spacecraft, artwork on the covers of these paperback books. Yep. My mother, God bless her, she bought a book from a shop that she saw, which she thought was another one in this series. But it turns out it was a book about UFOs and had a picture of a flying saucer on the front. And she thought she was doing me a favour. And I guess she was in the end, because that opened my eyes to this weird and wonderful subject that we all sort of know and love, or hate, or wherever you fall in the spectrum.
So in a way, happenstance set you on a path that wasn't meant to be on, so to speak. Or were you meant to be on it, do you think?
Who knows? I'm not sure I believe in fate too much, but it sent me down a road of discovery over years. I haven't always been able to devote 100% of my time towards it. Real life always gets in the way of things. I'm sure you'll find that yourself.
Oh God, yeah.
But about 3 or 4 years ago, I managed to sort of get back into it full time, and of course. 2017, I think, well, it's more than 3 or 4 years. 2017, when those 3 videos came out, the 3 US Navy videos that were released as the Go Fast FLIR 1 and the gimbal footage. It's sort of not just myself, but lots of other people. Their passion was kind of reignited by those and some of the other things that were happening at that time. I got back into it quite strongly. Started watching podcasts, started reaching out to people who either I'd heard of, or I just got talking to on social media, and it developed from there, really. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that one. Before we delve into the UAP topics, what do you think about the history of the UK with all the old bases being built over, etc.? Because I know you're well into aviation, so. I
guess, yeah. I mean, we've had a Cold War dividend. I mean, I know things are sort of heating up a bit in the East with the Ukraine war, etc., and the tension between Russia and the West. But really, over the last sort of 30 years since the fall of the Cold War, fall of the wall, there has been that peace dividend. So it's natural that governments, not just in Britain, but other countries, they're going to scale back their militaries because they don't think there's a need for such big forces anymore. So we've got rid of quite a lot of our navy. We don't have the aeroplanes in our air force anymore. So naturally, those bases that they once flew from are going to be shut because the government find they can get money for them. They can sell them to housing. They can sell them back to land for agriculture. You name it. Somebody's going to come and offer money to develop those sites or use them for prisons or whatever that you want to use them for. But then again, after the Second World War, when we had a surfeit of airfields, you found the same thing, but much on a bigger scale. They would go back to agriculture or they'd be built on, etc., etc. So there's always a time in history where the people who pull the levers of power think that we don't need such a powerful military anymore. Having said that, when you look at history, you'll find that tends to bite them on the backside, some years down the line. So,
ill-prepared at some stage.
Well, yeah, we're all fighting the last war, I believe the phrase is. At some stage, they'll probably have to have a time when they'll have to build up the forces again. But who knows when that'll be.
Do you think, though, with the building over these places, and I don't blame the government, if you've got the space and you need room for for X, Y, and Z. I understand you do it,
Yeah.
but are we losing history by building over it?
Oh, we're certainly losing history, but it depends on how you view the history. If you're happy to look over a site and imagine what was there, and you have some, some interpretation boards, some local councils are quite good at that kind of thing. Then
Hmm.
it's up to you as to how much you can envisage about what happens there. Some sites have been turned into living museums, so
Mm.
it all depends on what's left. And some of the airfields up where I live, up in the northeast, they've gone to wreck and ruin. They're still quite a lot if you know where to look. And I'm sure that's the case in other places down the country. So, it depends on how much is left as to how much you can get out of a site and know what was there and how much you can enjoy just, walking around and seeing what's left.
True that. Now, see, the reason I brought this up is that I know you're an aviation expert and you love the history of World War II, etc. Literally, right by me, there used to be an airfield where the first jet engine was built. The whistle
Ah,
engine, if you know that,
okay.
that's right by me, and all that was built over recently. And
Mm.
you think as you walking along, I used to like walk along the old barrack routes and everything. And you think, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in and builds, and you think, oh, that's all shame. All that history is lost, and that's I just brought that to mind, and I wondered if it was happening around your neck of the woods and everywhere
It,
else.
well, it certainly happened in the past. I mean, what was the airfield at Sunderland was taken over to build the Nissan car factory back in the 1980s. So a big swathe of of history went there with old hangars and all the rest of it. Some buildings were knocked down, and in other airfields, yes, there's been development. Some farmers have knocked down unsafe buildings, so a lot of the former structures have gone from other airfields. Acklington, where I used to live in Northumberland, it was turned into a prison. So some places do end up being used for other things. But obviously there are still airfields that you can basically just walk around, if it's not private property, and you can see all the old buildings, or you can see bases of buildings, the foundations, hidden away sometimes in trees and all the rest of it. So it's just knowing where to look. But yeah, I spent many an hour looking around over there, old airfields over the years.
Yeah, I kind of like it myself. Myself and my girlfriend, we go down on the southwest coast path.
Hmm.
And along that, there's a lot of old war emplacements and
Yeah.
airfields and stuff. And it's just to find those buildings randomly, like you said, in the woods and that. Just a side journey there. Okay, let's get into the topic of Foo Fighters. Now,
Mm.
you've written a couple of books on the early accounts of UFOs, i.e.,
Yep.
nowadays called UAPs, specifically around the time of World War II, and dealing with the topic of Foo Fighters. So, I suppose we should start with the basics and get it out of the way. What does the term Foo Fighters mean?
Okay, so specifically, Foo Fighters was coined by an American crewman back in November 1944 to describe effectively balls of light which were following US Army Air Force night fighters over occupied Europe, so over eastern France, eastern Belgium, western Germany, and it was over a specific time frame. So it was about the last week or so of November 1944, right to the end of the war in Europe, which was beginning of May 1945. And after week after week after week in sort of November, late November and December 1944, the crews of specific US Army Air Force night fighter squadrons operating in Europe, but also in Italy, in 1945, were being, they were seeing these balls of light, these red balls of light, sometimes yellow, sometimes orange, on a regular basis. Now they weren't just hanging in the sky; these things they were actually following their airplanes. And when they were trying to do evasive action maneuvers to get rid of them off their tail, these things just stayed with them. And of course, they thought they were German secret weapons, but nothing in the German arsenal or anything under development actually, you can reconcile towards these things that were being seen. Intelligence, both US Army Air Force and RAF, tried to get into what these things were, but by the end of the war, they were still no further forward, to the point of where one stage, one to and froing of messages from senior officers back down the line, if you like, said, well, which part of the aircraft are these lights attached to? Well, that just was a complete lack of understanding as to what
Hmm.
these things were. But the Foo Fighters, that's the name that people know, but actually things have been seen much earlier than that. So, not just lights, but actual craft or objects had been seen as early as 1940. So you're going really back, really early in the war. And they weren't just seen over that particular area I mentioned before. They were seen all over the over Europe. Those are reports from Norway. There's reports from North Africa, from France, from Eastern Europe. So it's quite a widespread phenomenon, and there's no hard and fast kind of that, they're just lights. It was a whole wide encompassing kind of range of shapes, sizes, colors, all the rest of it. So it was a fascinating time.
Yeah, and they just wrapped it up under this umbrella term Foo Fighters.
Well, yeah, they just got the point where they thought the RAF the British Air Ministry, who were the people who the Americans eventually went to in March 1945 to say, look, can you tell us what these things are? They replied by saying, well, they're probably jet fighters, by the Luftwaffe jet fighters, or there's some kind of flak rocket, like an anti-aircraft rocket. But if you look at those kind of that technology, it could never explain what these pilots were seeing, but that's what they were written off as officially. And because it was the end of the war and the sightings basically fell off a cliff, probably because there weren't that many people flying around anymore to report them. They just forgot about them. But of course, 2 years later, the modern day UFO phenomenon started in June 47, and of course, all the Foo Fighters stuff was forgotten. It was almost as if it never happened.
Even though it's clearly one and the same thing in theory.
Well, it might well be. I mean, I can't
Yeah.
say for certain, but it's certainly something that was definitely unexplained back then. And the American crews were getting really, really scared because these things were following the aircraft and they couldn't do anything about them. Now, they weren't attacking, they weren't opening fire on the aircraft, so they weren't necessarily in any danger. But of course, they didn't see it that way, because any light coming up behind an aircraft, they thought was a German night fighter. So of course they would be scared. And it did get the point where they wanted answers and they never got them.
Which is almost where we're at now, isn't it? I suppose.
Well, yeah, very true. Yeah,
yeah. Nothing's changed. History is repeating itself.
Basically, ufology goes around in circles. Every so often you get the same things happen. The scale of it just changes sometimes, but the actual essentials as to what happens here, you get these official investigations. You get the Air Force involvement, or now we've got the US Navy and Department of Defense involvement. But these things have happened before. They've looked at the problem officially. They've had programs to investigate UFOs, and then they've wrapped it up after a while because they just don't get anywhere. It's really weird. So are we going to have the same again with what's happening at the moment? It's just one of these things you just can't answer until possibly it happens.
I know, but why can't you answer it, Graeme? What's wrong with you?
Well, oh, sorry, Paul. Yeah, sorry, my bad. It's something that's been puzzling people over the years. If it was one specific thing, if it was just like a red light, let's say, for argument's sake, that did a certain type of maneuvers, then you could pin it down to something. And you could say, well, look, we know, roughly what it is and what it does. But because it's such a wide-ranging phenomenon, you get all, again, it's like the Foo Fighter kind of thing from World War II. They're all shapes and sizes. They're all colors. They all seem to move in different ways. There's no kind of set set of maneuvers or colors or shapes that you can pin down and say, this is what a UFO is. So therefore, because you've got such a wide range of things going on, and that's notwithstanding all the abduction stuff and all the rest of it, where do you begin? How do you get one bit that you can solve when there's just so much going on? I don't blame anybody who just throws their hands up in the air and goes, I just don't know,
Of course, I think this topic's too big for one person. It needs a whole array. The term Foo Fighter itself, do we know the etymology of that word, where it came from, who coined it?
Yeah, we do, yeah. So it was a US Army Air Force radar operator. He was called Donald Myers, and he belonged to the 415th Night Fighter Squadron, who were based in eastern France at the time. They were based in Nancy. And that was the last week in November 1944. And he was interested in comic books, funny enough. And one of the comics that he was reading was one called Smokey Stover. And it was a cartoon fireman. And one of his catchphrases was, where there's foo, there's fire. Now, the foo was probably based on the French word for fire, which is F-E-U, but it was in the comic, it was F-O-O. And he drove a fire engine, which is called the Foo-mobile. So you can see where this is coming from. And he basically went into the squadron intelligence officer's office one day after they'd had a run-in with one of these lights. And when asked to explain what was happening, he got this comic book out of his back pocket and slammed it down on the intelligence officer's desk and said, it's one of the Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
So I blanked out the swear word. And that's what they were called. And that's where the name came from. And it developed. So there was a couple of, there was about 3 or 4 US Army Air Force night fighter squadrons operating in that part of Europe. And they all started using the word after a while. And then the name by about February 1945, there was 2 units based in Italy, and they were using the same phrase as well. So it did actually, move around once people started to know what they were, and they just applied it to the things they were seeing as well. The RAF had a different name. Some pilots called it the Thing. They had a different name. Or the Light. You'll see this name pop up occasionally in logbooks or mission reports. So who knows what these things were?
Well, no one.
Exactly. I don't. I wrote a book on it, and I still no further forward, I'm afraid.
No. What's the best story of Foo Fighters I think you've heard or researched yourself?
Oh, okay. So March 1942. So 25th of March 1942. There's an RAF bomber coming back from a raid on Essen in Germany. So that's in the Ruhr, and they're flying over Holland. And this is actually a Polish crewed aircraft. It was from 301 Squadron, which were based in Lincolnshire. And the rear gunner of this Wellington bomber sees this orange disc coming up behind his aircraft. And he shouts over the intercom to the pilot. He says, Skipper, I've got this thing coming up behind me. And the pilot says, if it gets any closer, open fire at it, because they thought it was a German night fighter. I mean, what else would it be? And this disc comes up the walls, and when it gets into firing range, the tail gunner opens up with these .303-inch machine guns. And the tracer, because every 10th round or so is a bullet, is a tracer bullet, so it's an incendiary. So you can see where the bullets go in nighttime. Because if you were just firing ordinary bullets in the dark, you wouldn't know where they were going. So you can see these like kind of like streams of light going out from the guns, and they go into this light, and nothing happens. So it's not like it's an aircraft. It doesn't catch fire. It doesn't explode because the bullets are hitting it. It doesn't fall away in flames. It just sits there and takes the bullets.
Do they know they hit it? As in,
could
they hear a sound, or was it?
Well, it's not that because it's too far away, but they can see where the trace of bullets are going. So you can imagine like shining a torch at something. You'll see where the torch beam goes. Well, you can imagine like a stream every so often of these lighted bullets going out, and you can see where they're going. You saw the gunners saw them go into the light, and nothing happened. Now, after a little while, this light then moved around to the side of the aeroplane and sat off the wingtip.
That's it. What, really close, you mean?
Yeah. Just some distance off the wingtip, but it's not as if it was opening fire at the bomber. It was just sitting there. Now, by that time, because the tail gunner had moved his turret around, so he could still open fire at this thing as it was moving around. And of course, by the time it was sitting off the wingtip at a certain distance, the nose gun position, he could turn his turret as well, and he started firing at it. And again, it was just taking the bullets. It then moved around to the front of the airplane and sat off the front of the nose of the airplane, some distance ahead of the airplane, as it was flying through the skies at about just less than 200 miles an hour. So it was maintaining station with his bomber flying through the skies over Holland. And again, the nose gun, turret gunner was turning his turret, and he was firing at this thing. And then it just shot off into the heavens at 45 degrees. Now, when they got back to the base, the crew were telling when they were debriefed by the intelligence officers, that happened after every raid. It was usually a case of, what the flak defense is like. Did you drop your bombs on time? All this kind of stuff. And they mentioned then about this thing they'd encountered. And the first thing the intelligence officer said, well, have you been drinking? Kind of thing, because he didn't believe them. But luckily, the crew of the aircraft behind them in the bomber screen also saw this thing, and he said, he backed them up to say this thing had basically flown around your airplane, and he'd had a run-in with it as well. It had flown past his airplane as well. So it's a weird one because there's no other stories like that. I've never come across a similar story, in so much as something that actually maneuvered around an airplane so precisely. There are stories of the American aircraft have these lights following them and tracking their movements, but not something that managed to basically move around so precisely around a bomber like that. But it's a real. So
that's the one. That's the one you think where they've had more interaction with the crew.
Well, in terms of opening fire at it and nothing happening. There are other stories later in the war of objects being shot at and nothing happening. Or them falling away, but they're not as kind of detailed as this one. And this Polish pilot, he came forward in about 1962 and told his story. He was living in Canada by that time, and the story finally emerged. But you read books from the 70s and 80s and 90s, and you won't find that anywhere. It's quite an obscure story. It's one of those things that the people who wrote UFO books back then, they seem to just forget that these things that happened in World War II, or it didn't fit the narrative, or maybe they just didn't know. I don't know. But these stories never appeared. So yeah.
Well, I've certainly not heard that one before, and I think it's part to do with the fact that it's wartime and they've got more important or more pressing things to think about, i.e.,
Possibly.
saving their own asses, essentially. Excuse the French. And you know what I mean? They haven't got time to put on rogue things so much.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, but they would have been interested though, because
Oh
when you
yeah.
look when you go into the intelligence files, and actually I was looking at some today. When you look at Bomber Command's intelligence files, they actually do try to work out what some of these things were that were reported. There were other stories of what they called rockets, because they used all ththese catch-all terms, but there was these rockets that were zigzagging after bombers. Now that's not missile technology, it's because we're looking at 1942 here, and this was August 1942. There's reports of things like that, but these reports go into 43 and 44. Now, the Germans never managed to field an operational air-to-air service-to-air missile because they had problems with guidance networks, the guidance systems, and also the rocket motors. So they never fielded an operational missile, and they never test fired in live conditions either. So you have to try and wonder what these things were. But when you look at the intelligence files that the RAF were trying to delve into the subject, and they were looking at the reports that the aircrew were passing on, they're completely stumped. They think they might be some kind of new German secret weapon, but they can't pin it down. And also, with hindsight, we know that they weren't entirely kind of conscious of exactly what was happening in Germany to the scale of the failure that the Germans were encountering. But there's, when you look back from now and you know the history of all this kind of technology, you still can't reconcile these reports with what the Germans were working on. So the RAF were definitely stumped. But they'd been reporting bombers being followed by lights as early as March 1940. That's the first references I can actually find in the intelligence reports. And that's not the squadron reports, that's the kind of behind the scenes stuff that every month they would do the reports of how efficient the bombing campaign against Germany was. And then buried away in these reports are what they call phenomena. And they actually have that word for it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's completely crazy. But this information never really saw the light of day in the books I used to read.
No, me neither. I was talking to somebody the other day about the books we used to get back in the 80s when I was growing up. And you had the odd ghosts, you had the famous UFO photographs.
Yeah.
But that was it. You didn't see the history of it. So it's good that you've got people like yourself that will delve into it and bring it to the light.
But even the more in-depth books that I used to read, the ones by the authors who were concentrating on the UFO subject, some of the famous names, it just didn't even sort of enter their worldview at all. So it's really strange.
It is very much strange. Obviously, you mentioned the RAF there, and they're coming to the conclusion that they don't have a conclusion.
Yeah.
Have we got the same coming from the Americans, Canadians, Australians? Or have you not looked into it personally?
Well, we do and we don't. I mean, let's just go back a little bit further. So if you go back to the 50s and 60s, when the Americans actually had their official UFO programs, they came to the conclusion reasonably early on that if they had more information, they could solve these things in mundane terms. So they could write them off as balloons, they could write them off as stars, meteors, birds, you name it, in conventional terms. And they actually employed panels of scientists. There was a CIA-sponsored panel called the Robinson Panel in January 1953, which was basically to oversee what investigation work had done by then to see whether it was worth continuing. And they were the people who said, look, if it wasn't just for more information, we can have this thing solved. And then a bit later on, they threw a whole load of data at an IBM computer and tried to see if they could reduce it down to numbers to see whether they could work out common factors. And again, it was, well, we just need a bit more data, but then we can write it off as conventional terms. So that was the kind of mindset that the US Air Force developed until Blue Book, which was a third and final of their official investigation programs. When that was terminated in 1969, that was how they left it. And of course, we've got this kind of hiatus until about 27, well, actually until around about 2008, 2009, when the ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, was inaugurated. So between those times, 69 and around about 2009, 2009, 2010, etc., there's a bit of a kind of a limbo, if you like. We don't know what happened really, whether there was any official investigations, whether anything changed over that period of time. Then when this new information starts, so there's more of a concentration on military cases, and there's a military investigating the military. And people like Luella Zondo, who was the head of the ATIP at the time, he was a director, and they're getting into military reports and they've got footage and all the rest of it. Then that brings it out of the realms of, well, they're just birds, they're just stars, they're just weather balloons. Because those things that were seen on those videos, and I'm sure you've seen them, and I'm sure a lot of the audience has seen them, they're not things you can explain in conventional terms. That thing that's what they call gimbal, which is flying against the wind, which is twisting, it looks like a child's gyroscope. That, when I saw that first time round, that kind of not freaked me out, but it was one of those things that just, you just look at it, you think, that just doesn't look right. What is it? You can't just explain it away, So we're in a different position now. We don't know essentially what is being discussed between the Five Eyes, between America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and us, because we're not privy to those discussions, and I doubt we ever will be. Britain's really not very good at a lot of things, but we are good at keeping secrets. We invented spycraft effectively, and we are great at if things we want to bury, we are really good at it. And so I think that we will find the people who investigate UFOs, we find it very difficult to be able to get into the kind of mindset of the people who hide the secrets in Britain. The Ministry of Defence, they destroyed a whole load of files years ago, back in the 60s, of much earlier reports. So a lot of our history in terms of pilot and aircrew encounters or other people's encounters with UFOs is gone. That's what we've been told. It may or may not be true. There might still be isolated files which for some reason have been put away in other departments, and there are some isolated files in the 50s which managed to turn up in the National Archives, but they're very few and far between. And then the stuff that's released recently, say over the last 20 years, from sightings from the 80s and 90s. I don't know if you ever looked through those files that were released from the National Archives, but it's a kind of mixed bag. There are a few nice reports in them, but the rest of it's pretty kind of people with agendas writing huge letters to the MOD saying, this is my kind of like, I think they're all religious. I think they're all angels. There's a whole lot of weird and wonderful stuff that appears in there. And you have to wade through all this stuff to get to the little gems. So like Calvine from 1990, the Calvine object that was seen over Scotland. That
I don't know that one. Well, I might
the diamond-shaped object that was photographed by the two people who still remain anonymous to this day. It was seen on a hillside near Pitlochry in August 1990.
I might
look
have
online, you'll probably see it. Yeah, if you look online for the Calvine picture, you'll see it.
That reminds me of the Cash Landrum thing, because wasn't that meant to be a
well, yeah, there have been parallels drawn between the Cash Landrum object and the thing that was escorted by loads of helicopters, and this thing up in Scotland, which was either or not escorted by two Harriers, because one of the pictures that was taken actually has a picture of a Harrier in it as well. So who knows? The jury's out as to what the thing in Scotland was, whether it was some kind of strange radar kite technology, or whether it was some super secret American platform, or whether it was a genuine UFO. Who knows?
Who knows exactly?
Yeah, exactly.
I want that stuff to come out so we do know.
Well, exactly.
I know you're going to be like me in that you really want the answers, but you can't grasp them, and that's so frustrating, isn't it? I don't know.
It is, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people who over the years have set themselves up as experts in this field. And quite frankly, if somebody says they're an expert in ufology, run, because there aren't experts. You can't be an expert on something which is completely unknown and you don't know what the answer is. We can be knowledgeable about things, and if anything, yes, okay, I might be knowledgeable about the Foo Fighters, but in terms of other things, we're all pretty much the same level. We're still scraping around trying to find out what the answers are. And yes, okay, you might get, you might find some documents, you might find some witnesses, and you get a little bit further down the road. But really, I don't know how much further down that road we are until they appear on the White House lawn or they appear over 10 Downing Street. Then, are we going to be any further forward? People are making strides. That is for sure. I mean, every day if you look on social media, especially on Twitter, because I'm quite confident I'm more on Twitter than I'm on Facebook. but you will find stories about people coming forward or new developments in the people who have already come forward, like David Grush, former intelligence for now a whistleblower who gave testimony to Congress. And that's not something you would do if you were making a story up. And then there's new little bits of pieces come out of interviews he's given since about the things he's been told about what exists, or craft that have been retrieved, and all this kind of thing from crashes. So piece by piece, we're building up a picture of what may well be going on. But then, of course, you have disinformation. You have people who hoax things. I'm not saying David Grush is somebody who's a disinformation agent or a hoaxer, but other people in the past have been. So you have to be wary. It's kind of trust but verify kind of arrangement. Don't necessarily take things at face value. Look into them. Do your research. Make sure that you get corroboration from other sources so you can back up what people say. Because there's always been charlatans in ufology, like other fields. People want to make a fast buck from people who want to believe. So yeah, you've got to be careful.
I completely agree. Now, getting back to the Foo Fighters themselves, so like I said to you, or you said to me, technically, the RAF didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Now I alluded to the fact that the Canadians, they would have come out with the same thing. Presumably, they didn't know. The Americans, as you went through that history of theirs with Blue Book, etc.,
Americans
they
didn't know what they were. Yeah.
Same with the Australians, presumably.
Well, there were certainly Australian and New Zealand pilots who were involved in sightings, but they would defer to the British Air Ministry because that was the kind of way it worked. Things happened out in the Pacific Theatre operations as well. So the Americans were seeing strange things out there. They were seeing balls of fire, they called them out there. And of course, chances are RAF and New Zealand and Australian pilots would see them as well. However, we're basically kind of hamstrung by the kind of reporting from the squadron records. When you look at the mission reports, some squadrons are really good at really kind of detailed reports of the kind of missions the pilots flew and crews flew. Other squadrons aren't so good; it's not so detailed, and some squadrons have very little. So you're at the mercy of how kind of thorough the kind of reporting
the process
was.
of another country.
Well, yeah, and but not just other countries. The RAF themselves in Britain, some bomber squadrons, you get chapter and verse of bombing missions. Others, you're lucky if you get a paragraph for a mission. Others, you get nothing. So you just have to wonder what else is kind of missing. What other reports
might be loads, won't there?
If they'd been a bit more kind of careful with the reporting, and with the best will in the world, I know what search terms to look for when I'm going through the National Archives to find some of these files that have this kind of information in, but other information might be tucked away in other places where we just don't know where they are because it's under a different file name or it's been categorized as something different, and sometimes it's happy accident that you come across things. But I have got things out of the US Air Force Historical Records Agency on microfilm, which is squadron reports and mission reports and all the rest of it, which detail all these weird and wonderful things that aircrew were encountering during World War II. So the information's out there. It's just knowing where to look.
Well, then on that basis, here's a question that you can't answer really, but I'll see if you can try it.
Okay.
How much information do you think is buried out there that we haven't uncovered yet? I.e., do you think you've touched 10% of the reports?
Okay. Well, bearing in mind, I wrote a 550-page book about the Foo Fighters and associated phenomenon, of which probably 2/3 of it was to do with actual reports of strange things. I would suspect that there's probably at least as much again that happened that either I haven't come across or maybe just not reported and that doesn't survive in documentation. And there may well be another kind of percentage again which never got reported because the stigma was alive and well back then. I mean, we all know about the stigma that happened to, say, US Army, to US Air Force pilots in the 50s and 60s. Airline pilots the same. They were fear of their jobs if they reported things like this, so they just stopped reporting them. Now, back in the World War II, if you look at 43 Squadron, it was a Hurricane Squadron, were based in North Africa. They were doing night intruder missions behind German lines. Their pilots, one by one, were seeing things. They called it the thing. And they were reporting these things night after night, or they were coming into contact with it. And they were getting laughed at by their squadron colleagues, the ones that didn't see them. But one by one, they saw them. and of course it wasn't a joke anymore.
Mm.
But you can imagine that kind of squadron, kind of the kind of banter that you get from your mates. Oh, you're seeing flying, you're seeing lights in the sky now. Shouldn't it be like, are you wanting to like? It's one of these things. Do you want to be flying anymore? Is this a way of trying to stop flying? Are you trying to be medically retired, or all this kind of stuff went on? And you can imagine there was probably a reluctance after a while in other units as well, just to keep quiet, because you didn't want that your intelligence officers thinking you were trying to stop flying, because that was actually cowardice in the face of the enemy in terms of the RAF. You were reduced to the ranks. You had to wear a white sash on your hat. You had all your rank badges were taken off you, all the rest of it, and nobody wanted that. So you didn't want to be kind of sort of treat somebody who's malingering or trying to get out of flying combat missions, and that might be how they were viewed, or they might just be viewed as being mad or stupid or all the rest of it. So naturally they clammed up, and there are cases of pilots who said, I didn't report this at the time, but they came forward after the war. So yeah, the stigma was alive and well back in the 40s in World War II.
Which is a shame, because that just tells you, as you alluded to, there's a shitload of data that we could have now, to give us more insight. It's a shame.
Exactly, and maybe pin it down a bit more as well.
Yes, because there could have been some better reports hidden there.
Yeah, but the bit you haven't touched on yet, which is the Luftwaffe.
Well, I was going to get to that. That's on my next page.
I've preempted you, right? Sorry.
Yes, but that's okay. Don't worry. Let's carry on with it, because in fact, I'll find my question. Yeah, Luftwaffe. No, I have got it. And trust me, I got German accounts. Is the fourth question.
So here's the thing.
Next.
So you can almost count the number of German accounts that exist on two hands. There aren't that many, but there's a reason for that, because a lot of their documentation was destroyed before the end of the war. They were very thorough in how they destroyed. Now, some years exist, and when I was looking into whether German jet night fighters, and there were such a thing, were responsible for some of the lights that were seen in the sky in early 1945, I actually looked through some of the loss reports that the German Air Force actually had, and some of the actual detailed reports for some of the missions they flew, and that information is available. But it's not available for other units in certain other parts of the war and certain other times. It's very difficult to maybe plow through some of that information, because I do have some working German, and especially some of the military terminology, but actually trying to get a hold of the information is really difficult. And as far as I'm aware, German researchers themselves haven't touched this subject, So
that's unusual. Is that because of the lack of evidence and everything's burnt?
No, it's more to do with the cultural thing about the war.
Oh, I see, because they don't like to refer to it.
It's just one of the things they prefer to forget. So they're quite hot on things that happen, the more contemporary events. But the people who I spoke to, German researchers, the few I've spoke to over the years, there's this. It's not necessarily reluctance, but there's a bit of that, I think. But also it may be just too big a problem to actually get on top of. You'd have to plow through, report after report. You might get nowhere. And I've looked through hundreds of squadron reports, monthly reports, which themselves maybe run at 20, 30 pages, and read through and found nothing. And then every so often it'll be a month for a particular squadron, and it'll be, bingo, here's 2 or 3 reports in that month. So you can wade through a whole lot of nothing, and then just every so often you'll find something. So it's quite involved in terms of time. I wish I had an hour for a pound for every hour I've spent finding nothing. Over these last few years.
Perhaps here's the thing, though, right? You're an aviation expert, and you love the genre and all that sort of stuff. So for you, looking through it must give you reward even when you don't find.
Oh yeah, it does. Yeah, reports. Definitely, because I'm looking through things that I probably never would have thought about looking through, because I've read bomber crew autobiographies and biographies of squadrons and all the rest of it. But when you look at the raw data, this kind of stuff that was actually written during the war, that's that time and that place, just the day after a bombing raid, and they're writing about it, then it gives that kind of immediacy. And it's all in jargon as well, so you have to have a working knowledge of what you're looking at. If somebody comes out of the blue and they have no idea about RAF terminology, they're going to be lost anyway. So it's and also they talk about lights and flares and things like and things that, if you're not entirely sure about what you're reading, you could misinterpret it for being UFOs. But you have to have a little bit of knowledge about what kind of lights were in the sky at the time to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff as well. So what is a bona fide kind of fighter flare or a target, an indicator, the things that we're seeing in the sky, and then all this other weird stuff which you can't, as I said before, you can't reconcile with the technology that we were using and the Germans were using, and that's where the mystery starts. Is what these things were, and we don't know.
So essentially, we need a German Graham, don't
We
we?
do. We
Someone of
do.
your ilk that loves aviation and then the
And
UFO topic.
UFOs. We do.
Yes. So
Definitely.
if you're out there listening, and I can't
Yeah.
speak German, so you'll have to understand English, get on it because we need some from your side because it is important. Let's get into what is the best photographic or even film evidence, if any exists, that we have from the war.
We don't, is the answer.
Oh,
We do have photographic evidence, but it's pretty patchy. When you there's a lot of Japanese photographs out there, but there's no context. There's no kind of it was taken on a certain date, certain time, certain place. There's the unit involved, so you can't trace things like that. There are pictures that have been doctored from. There's a famous picture of US B-17s flying over Europe. They're from the 384th Bomb Group. You can tell that by the markings on the aeroplane. And then somebody's doctored the pictures to put little kind of like lights around the aeroplanes. But you can find the original photograph, and those lights don't appear. And in my Foo Fighters book, I actually show those two pictures to show that hoaxes are out there. And then you see them on the internet. People are saying, "Well, this is evidence of Foo Fighters," and no, it's not. There are other photographs, but there's not enough context around them to work out what they are. And in terms of the Japanese photographs, there's actually a school of thought that thinks because they had a shortage of raw materials, and that was part of the reason why they were fighting. They were trying to grab oil and things like that, but also other raw materials. They had a shortage of the kind of certain things that they needed for developing film. So the film itself, the pictures that they came up with weren't good. They weren't sharp. They sometimes had kind of blobs on them, that may not have appeared if they had the right chemicals to do the development properly. So sometimes these things that appear on these photographs, which have been hailed as, "Oh, these are UFOs," there might just be defects in the film. So yes, there are pictures out there, but as to how kind of accurate they are, then it's anybody's guess, really. So I err on the side of caution, Paul. It's a case of if I can't work out a time and a place and date and then start doing a bit of digging, then it's like somebody's witness report when you can't back it up. It's an interesting story. It's nice to see, but it doesn't get you anywhere. And I'm afraid UFO photographs full stop are a bit like that. Whereas you can't necessarily tell whether hoaxed. You can rule it out to a certain percentage, but there's always that kind of possibility. Now, having said that, there are some really good ones, and there are probably ones which, okay, the probability is that they weren't hoaxed; they're just something anomalous. But sometimes it is somebody literally throwing a hook up in the air and taking a picture and going, "Look, there's an UFO."
yes.
When you come to the film, however, that's a different story because that's much harder to, especially ones which are taken long ago. They're much harder to forge. Nowadays with Photoshop, and all the video technology you've got. I mean, you're an animator, right?
Yes.
I'm sure you know how to forge something if you wanted to go about it.
I'm good on Photoshop, so
Yeah.
I could do it if I wanted to. Yes, it's
But that's
easy.
the thing nowadays, you see. So, a lot of people like you will have the necessary skills to be able to not just forge a photograph to make it plausible to the average Joe in the street, but also film nowadays. You can probably do a lot with film to make it look like something it isn't. And you'd have to be much more specialized to be able to tell whether it's true or not. Because, you look at films nowadays as well with CGI, and a lot of it, to first glance, looks quite real. So, but when you looked at those FLIR, those forward-looking infrared videos, the three that were mentioned before, the 2017 releases, that particular gimbal footage, the one of that thing that looks like a gyroscope, then you see it sort of turn on its axis when it's in mid-flight. That, to me, is the real deal. It is a verified US Navy cockpit FLIR footage that's verified by the Pentagon. They have actually verified the footage to say, yes, it's military footage. Now, that doesn't say what it is, and obviously the jury's still out as to what it is, and there's no official word as to what it is either. So that's truly anomalous, rather. So that's what we should be looking at. And there are rumored to be other, sets of films, footage like that out there. There's supposed to be a 23-minute video somewhere of something anomalous as well. But look, the thing about the gimbal footage is what happened before we see the start of that footage? What happened afterwards? Because no doubt they were still filming it, from
Oh, of course, because
with
it's
the infrared
constantly
camera.
recording, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you listen to the voice, the voice track, they say there's other ones out there. There's a fleet of
That's
them.
right.
There's supposed to be six of them out, a formation of six beyond it. Whether they're the same object or there's something different. So it's yeah, those are really intriguing stories, and the footage is equally as intriguing, if not more.
Correct. I look forward to seeing what is coming extra from that because, like you say, there is meant to be more coming, or was meant to, like a year or two ago, that we haven't seen out there yet.
People keep there's rumors of much more footage out there. I guess it's just the hoops they have to go through to get it released. And if you ever hear, of the kind of all the stuff that the shenanigans that went around them trying to release those 3 videos, then just to get those 3 short, because they are fairly short minutes of footage. Imagine how much they're going to try and get something else released. And the official word is it's not that what's on the footage, it's actually the platforms they use to record it. So, and I can understand a defense argument as to, we don't want to release this information because it shows how we got it. It shows the technology involved. It shows the capabilities. And, and I definitely understand that argument. But if there's some way of stripping that away and just showing the imagery to say, well, this is what we saw, this is the shape of it, etc., and this is what it does, then, I can't necessarily see the harm in that.
Imagine getting a camera view and you black out even the heads-up display parts, if that's the bits we're talking about. Yes, I agree. And they should at least show it and in greater detail. Because we know we've got a compressed version. I want to see the high def stuff, And
actually, when you see the FLIR footage that we've been talking about there, that information, that all that stuff around the periphery is actually there. You can see the speed, you can see the angle, you can see the height and all the rest of it. So it's not as if it's a big secret in that. So if they have similar footage, then I can't see any reason why they can't release it.
Too right. Now, the reason I mentioned the photographic about the Foo Fighters themselves was to bring into focus there's a window, I believe, for evidence where you can say between this decade and this decade, that isn't going to be faked, that stuff. Now, from the 30s, 40s, even like early 50s, you're going to get some photographs and all you're going to see is a black blob with loads of distortion around it. That doesn't prove anything. But when you get to that window of good technology and there was no fake tools, i.e. no Photoshop, no AI, no all that stuff, I think that's the window we need to look at. And like you alluded to a minute ago, from recently, I know, let's say 2010 onwards, that's where Photoshop and AI, so we need to be looking at that window. This is just a shame that the technology wasn't better at the time of World War II, because we'd have had I presume a shitload of snaps, a shed load.
We would have. I mean, there are rumors of pictures as well, which never come to light. There's a story from November 1942 of an anti-submarine aircraft over the Bay of Biscay, and this object comes up behind them. It's wingless. It's huge. And actually, there's one of the crewmen on board the aircraft, an American aircraft. He takes pictures of this thing. He takes 6 pictures, but those pictures have never come to light. So imagine if they came to light, because apparently one of them is supposed to be really sharp. According to the ball gunner who was on this Liberator airplane, who for some reason was privy to this incident. So yeah, who knows? The actual crewman who took the pictures died on a raid like 3 months later, so nobody can question him himself. But there were other crew on the aircraft who came forward after the war and said this thing happened. So yeah, it's really strange. So yeah, there's probably, like you mentioned before, about the documentation that might exist or for some reason doesn't exist. Photographs may well exist hidden away in a file somewhere, but it's knowing where that file is and does it still exist. So
I think that we also spoke about the stigma recently. I think that plays such a massive part in why we haven't got more evidence or more progress to this point. I was speaking to, I don't know if you know Christian Lambright.
I've heard of him.
Oh, you've heard it. He investigated like the Ray Stanford films and stuff, which he says there's films of UFOs and it's amazing. And why aren't we seeing it? He hasn't released them or doesn't want to release it for whatever reason. That means there's a shed load of people out there who are almost in the same boat, that they'll have this evidence, they'll have this photos, they have this film, and why isn't humanity, i.e. the people like me and you that really want to know, seeing it?
Exactly. That's the $64,000 question.
Isn't it? We're dealing with technology and then humans' shame or stigma. I just don't. It's such a terrible position to be in when we want to know the answers.
It is, yeah, yeah. Well,
Mm,
it's what I suppose it's an enduring mystery, and people have been looking at it for decades now, and people like myself who have been interested in it since the mid 1970s. In some ways, we feel like we're no further forward, but actually we are, because we have the tools nowadays with the internet to be able to look through a whole lot of stuff that we'd never ever have access to.
yes.
And every so often, new things are being discovered, new documents from long ago are turning up. There are still, people coming forward to tell their stories from decades ago. We are now getting people who have been involved much more recently in researching these on an official capacity, usually for one military or another, usually the Americans, and they're coming forward and they're risking a lot. They're risking their livelihoods, their liberty, their reputation, and really, you're not going to do that unless you're kosher, unless you
Mm.
actually have a story worth telling as well. But for every kind of step forward, there's always people on the other side who are going to push back, and you're going to get that step back. We've seen with the recent attempt to get a bill through the American government to try and release UAP documentation to open up a kind of floodgates for documents, for witness accounts, for you name it. It was watered down under pressure from other politicians. They didn't want certain aspects of this bill to go forward. They either felt it was far-reaching, or they maybe in the pay or under the influence of people who want to keep these secrets. Some of the politicians who were involved in oh no, that's too far, that they are, if you read up on these people and you believe what other people say about them, they are supported by some of the big aircraft manufacturers. And they may be the people who are researching these things. They may be the people, the companies who actually have bits
Yes,
from
exactly.
crashes. They may be working on this. And if people are keeping secrets, or they don't want this to become common knowledge, then how better to have politicians who you're going to bankroll occasionally or fund their campaigns, all this kind of thing, so they owe you a favor, and therefore that's a favor they'll do. That if something comes along which might jeopardize that secret, they'll step on it. So
Yeah, all about control and money, isn't it? That's what it
yeah, well,
always
it
seems
comes
to
down
be
to that at
about.
the end of the day, I'm afraid. Yeah,
Mm.
but if you do believe the stories about crash retrievals, you go down the road of a UFO crash, it was from somewhere else, it has all this exotic technology on board, then would that exotic technology not help us today? We're facing a climate emergency. If you've got like reactionless travel, or you can do without burning oil to get around, is that not better for the planet? Why was this technology in common usage? Why aren't we seeing the fruits of it?
Control and money, isn't it? It's as
Well,
simple
let's
as
go
that.
back to the same
You are
old argument
speaking
again.
like a decent guy, yeah? And I would
Yeah,
think the same things. Why aren't you doing things for
yeah,
the betterment of humanity?
yeah.
This is why the whole idea of suppressing data, suppressing film, suppressing knowledge itself is not great. It's not a
No,
great
it's not.
reflection on humanity. We should be open and then let everyone progress nicely. However, what I do see from their perspective is they're obviously protecting, in theory, the US and UK interests, aren't they? Because they're saying if I give it all out there, then our enemies could have it, and then they
Well,
could get it.
that's definitely the argument. Yeah,
Yeah.
and of course there has been, back in the 40s and 50s when the Americans were first looking at this problem, they believed it was the Russians. They also believed it was the Chinese a bit later on. But then, when you mentioned before about the level of technology in terms of photography, if you look at the drone technology from back then, they were full size aeroplanes. There could never be drones back then that were UFOs. Now it's slightly different because
Mm.
drone technology has jumped in leaps and bounds recently, and they can do amazing things. They can stay up for a long period of time. They can do maneuvers which they couldn't do previously. So the lines are blurring a bit now as to what is and what isn't possible. But we're still nowhere near some of the kind of things that are being reported recently. The Tic Tac. And I'm sure you've heard of the Tic Tac
Hmm.
from the November 2004 Nimitz encounters. That thing, if you can imagine a ping pong ball inside a big bottle being shaken about and just bouncing about randomly, that's what it was doing over the surface of the water when the two Hornet crews saw it. It wasn't even turning; it was just kind of going and then just shooting off in a completely different direction without turning, without slowing down, without accelerating. Nothing we can build can do that. We don't have the technology to do that. And then also for something to stop in midair, to reorientate itself in the direction of an aircraft coming down to meet it, and then to shoot off into the sky, dogfight effectively with this U.S. Navy Hornet, and then shoot off over the horizon in less than a couple of seconds. And I think they worked it out to thousands and thousands of miles an hour. And then for the next thing they know, it's sitting at their cap point, their prearranged rendezvous point, as picked up by radar. And these things as well, because they're latched onto one of them. But according to the radar operators on this fleet of vessels that were tracking these things, they were dropping out of the sky from 80,000 feet down to about 28,000 feet in about less than a second. And then they were sitting there, and then they were dropping further towards the sea. And they've been tracking these things for days on a newly operated radar system, which may have been the reason why they could pick them up. But the only reason why they weren't picking them above 80,000 feet was that was the limit of the radar.
Yeah, radar.
Who knows where they were coming from?
A big mothership up there that we don't know about. It could be, you don't know.
Yeah, who knows?
I do agree. All these capabilities of these objects are just far beyond, way and above anything that we can come up with on this Earth currently, unless we do have retro engineered craft. But hey, that's a side thing. Now, going back to the Foo Fighters themselves, what purpose do you think that their flights were about? What were they doing?
Yeah, so again, it's one of these things where if you're going to answer that question, you have to put some kind of, you have to assume some things. Now, in the book I wrote about it, I didn't do that. There was the one thing I didn't do was say, look, this is what I think they are, because my opinion is as good as yours, yours is as good as mine, etc., etc. We're not experts. And I felt it was easier just to give the information and then say, look, to the reader, you make your mind up as to what these things are. There have been specific theories in the past. There's been a school of thought that think there might be what they call earthlights, which is a natural phenomenon, which might come from stresses in tectonic plates. But that would maybe hold for places where there's activity in that respect, like down fault lines, etc. But the places where these things were seen was all over Europe. So why weren't they seen in specific areas? So it's not necessarily you can rule that kind of theory out, but it doesn't necessarily hold water either. Were they German secret technology? Well, I've looked through everything I can work out, and it's something I've been interested in for decades, and I can't find anything that the Germans were working on or had planned, or even put into production that matches anything of the capabilities that these things were doing, or either the size or the shape or etc. And so you do then fall down to, well, what else can it be? Is it? I guess you've got the options, haven't you? You've got aliens. I don't like using that word, but let's throw it out there. You've got what they call ultra-terrestrials. So they walk among us, kind of thing. That the things that are here already, which we can't see for some reason, or they're us from the future. If you had a technology that you could go back in time and you could pick a part of history that you really want to see, where would you go? Well, World War II is quite a draw because it's quite
it's a big event. Yes.
It's a pivotal time in our history. You will go from almost like a World War I era kind of technology through to jet engines, through to the atom bomb. So and everything that entailed for the safety of the world afterwards. So I guess if you want to go to a point in time where there was a huge change, and also the social and military aspects of everything that happened to people around the world, that's a good time to go. I mean, if there's somewhere I want to go, that'd be probably, I would love to go and be in a little bubble, be able to watch it in real time and not affect me, sort of thing. So yeah, I can see that being possible if that is something that can happen if somebody in the future has invented time travel. Yeah, you might want to go see the dinosaurs, but you might want to go see World War II as well. They might be doing tour guides. It might be, or it could be some kind of remote sensing platform sent back from the future or sent from somewhere else to watch what was happening then.
Well, it's definitely
If
It's
you're going to
definitely an
throw theories out
observation
there,
thing, though, isn't it? It's an
yeah,
observation
I
thing.
think so. The fact that it's not attacking, it's not, would also tend to rule out that it was German. Because if you were going to build something that could follow Allied aeroplanes, well, you'd have some kind of a system that would actually be able to attack them, to ram them or to open fire on them or whatever. But these, some of these lights were following Allied bombers earlier in the war for 250 miles, and not doing anything. The lights were just following the bombers. So what's the point, kind of thing. So it's not a German weapon system. When I started looking into this, I ruled out pretty early on that they were German because they just didn't fit the picture.
Well, it wouldn't,
Um,
because, like you say, if it was German,
mhm.
and let's just speculate a sec, if it was,
Mm,
they would do a few of those flights, wouldn't they? Find out the patterns of flights, and then they would
mm.
aim all their guns in those directions and destroy all the flights coming over.
Yeah, yeah,
Because you would do that, and then it would be like the Ukraine-Russia war, where if they had that technology, they would then outfit with the bomb and then ram them.
yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
it clearly can't be that. And then obviously you had German accounts, and we know that we didn't have that technology to fly over and look at
And there
them.
are Russian accounts as well.
Tells you all you
There
need
are
to
a,
know.
there are a few Russian accounts, not many, and you've definitely got to take them with a pinch of salt, however, because a lot of these reports came out in the early 90s. And as somebody who's been to Russia, actually at that time, I found out that they were willing to give you things if you want to pay for it. And if they couldn't quite get what you wanted, they would either make it up or try and find something that was nearly as good. So I can see that people going to Russia and trying to get UFO reports out of Russia, if somebody thought they could make a quick dollar out of making something up and making it look something authentic, then they might do it. So I think some of the reports, because there is also Russian secrecy as well from back then. The reports don't have the unit names, they don't have necessarily the pilots' names. Some of them don't have the aircraft that were flying in, the types. So there's a lot of stuff you can't work out and you can't verify. But you've just got to take the accounts on face value. So they add up to a picture, but you don't necessarily rely on them.
Mm.
So yeah, but like a lot of Russian stuff, it's like that, I'm afraid.
Well, I'm certainly glad you offered time travel up as an option, because that was my
Okay.
next question: time travel to witness history up close.
Yeah.
That is where I would sit on it.
Mm.
I've always thought that, because imagine you were the offspring of one of these people
Mm.
in the future. Why wouldn't you want to go back and see your
Exactly.
granddad or
Yeah.
great granddad in the war?
Yeah.
Even if it's the
But
last time you might see them. So
But I mean, there could be another reason. It could be, you can imagine it could be a school program.
yes,
Today
yes.
we're going to go back to 1942. We're going to go to Guadalcanal. We're going to watch the Japanese fighting the Americans. It could be something like that. Yeah, I mean, you can come up with all kinds of theories. Some of them are equally as plausible as others, but yeah, and I don't know which one's right, if any of them are.
They're all right, aren't they? Until proven not right. That's the thing.
Well, they're certainly in play until they're proven.
Yeah, that's true.
Correct.
They're in play.
Yeah,
I like that one. That's better.
but I think you could almost fill like another half a book again with that kind of stuff. And really, when I'm writing a book, I don't think it's helpful from my point of view. I don't think it's helpful for the readership to for me just to kind of push a narrative. I've seen that too much with other books, and I'd rather just put the facts as I see them and as I found them, with some like kind of context. I think that's helpful, especially when you're going further back in history. And I like the Foo Fighters book. The way I wrote it was to give people an idea of what was happening around these reports as well, to explain some of the jargon involved, and to explain some of the other things that were happening. So you can say, oh yeah, I can understand why that is not that. Why it isn't a German secret weapon, because
Yes.
I've explained the level of technology that we're using, or I've tried to say, well, it does resemble that, but it can't be. And there was actually one report from, I think it's December 1943. There was an American bomber crew in the daytime flying over northwest Germany, and they saw this object. They couldn't work out what it was, but it was very small. It looked white, and it had this huge white kind of smoke trail behind it, and it was just flying really fast past their airplane. And I managed to work out what that was. It was one of the Measurement 163 comets under test.
Ah,
One of the rocket interceptors, because they were operating from that part of Germany at that time. They were being tested, and they were flying very fast, and the rocket propellant was white. It was a long white smoke trail, and those things flew at nearly 600 miles an hour. So yeah, that's probably what that was.
Mm.
So, and that's been a bit of a kind of mystery for years. People have included that when you see sometimes on the internet where you'll see mystery, the Foo Fighters described, you'll see this thing that appears in a RAF newsletter from early 1944. It's called Bang On, and it's a squadron newsletter, and they mention this thing that was reported by the Americans. And I looked at that report and I thought, and I looked at the place and I thought, I know they were testing comets there in 1943. Yeah, I bet that's what that was. And sure enough, yeah, it just fits the profile. So it's a 95% match, if you like.
Yeah, but you
So
take that
yeah,
outlier, you take that
yeah,
outlier out of the equation, yeah, because you've done your research, you've
yeah,
like pretty much identified what it is.
yeah.
There's still that core group of
Oh yeah,
cases
yeah.
that we know fit this other pattern,
Yeah. So I'm
and
not one
that's
of
the
these people
interesting
who
bit.
will just, ignore bits of information because it doesn't fit a narrative, because it doesn't tell the picture I want, it doesn't tell a story I want to, to pass on to readers. If I find something that I can work it out and go, yeah, that's what they say in mundane terms, in conventional terms, I'll do it, because it doesn't do anybody any favors to perpetuate myths. And part of the Foo Fighters
Yes.
book I wrote was about German flying saucers, because that's been a myth for years. That's been a myth since the mid 1950s. Um, Whereas when you actually delve into much deeper into it, and you find out the personalities involved, you find their motivations, you found the flimsy evidence, and it is really flimsy as to whether these things existed or not. You can just knock it down because there is no evidence. They're all stories, and when you boil them back to their origins, you come back to about 3 or 4 people who were trying to sell stories to newspapers, and that's where it originates from.
Money and power again and control. On that basis, right, of German saucers, do you think the declocker or the bell, does that fit into that doesn't exist category, or do you think that did?
Yeah, because I remember seeing it originally on Hunt for Zero Point, the documentary on Channel 4, Nick Cook's, and I spoke to Nick Cook about this and also some other stuff in the past. And the Polish guy who came up with this whole thing, Witowski, he, from what I can work out, he also wrote some books about German secret weapons, I think beforehand, and to my mind, they didn't sit right. They weren't quite. They were a bit on the kind of fantastical side, and I think this is another one. Yes, there was probably some kind of like underground kind of facility there, but the Germans were building underground factories all over Eastern Europe
Of
and
course,
all
to
over
hide
Germany
ammunition
because
and stuff.
they were hiding from our
Yeah.
bombers. So everything went underground or into dispersed forest factories and all the rest of it. So just because it was underground doesn't mean to say it was anything to do with some kind of exotic technology. And actually, the person who Vitaski based his whole shebang on was a guy called Jakob Sparrenberg, who was an SS, what they call the higher police leader. So he was like a kind of a regional government head for that particular part of Poland or Silesia in World War II. Now he wasn't even around at the end of the war. So for the last 6 months of the war, he was in Norway. He was packed off to Norway. So when this thing was supposed to be worked on, towards the end of the war, when they were supposed to be packing up and killing all the people who were involved, but all the stories that have circulated around the bell, the Die Glocke, he wasn't anywhere near. He wasn't involved, and yet he was then captured. He was then captured in the war because he'd been involved in atrocities in Poland, being an SS high police leader and responsible for issuing orders to kill, Polish partisans, to kill the population, all the rest of it. He was delivered to the Poles after the war, so he ended up in the hands of Polish military intelligence. And the story that Witowski, basically hooked onto was he somehow got hold of some either documents or witness testimony from a Polish army intelligence officer who was supposedly present in interrogations of this Sporenberg chap, who would then come out with this story about the bell. And that's where it comes from. It's one person. Now,
Do you
when you
think
get
he seeded it for it to sell books?
I don't even know if this actual source of the information is correct.
Okay.
And I've never found any corroborating evidence either. Now, I might not have looked hard enough. I might be doing the Polish author a disservice. You know, it's one of these things where when you tend to get a single source for one of these big, kind of huge myth kind of, or possibly real stories, you have to be careful because it's one person's story, it's one person's information, it's maybe one document. But even that's it's a bit flimsy, you know. If there were more people could come forward, if there was more eyewitnesses to say, yeah, I worked there, or, you know, I was a guard there, or I was one of the scientists there, you know, this kind of thing, or there was some more documentation around it, then I'll be more inclined to believe it. Whereas to me, it falls in the realms of the flying discs. There's lots of lovely stories. You know, people have been perpetuating these myths for years, and you'll see lovely graphics on the internet. You'll even see some photographs which purport to be flying discs in flight being tested. There are some stories of people seeing them and being involved in the programs, but when you boil them down, the people who say they saw them, you get back to these newspaper stories in the early 1950s that were trying to sell stories to newspapers. In one case, this engineer was trying to get a job with the Americans, you know, through the paperclip kind of thing, but he was passed over for some reason. He was delivering newspapers for the US Army in Germany, you know. So why was he doing that? If he was really a flying disc engineer, somebody building this amazing technology, why hadn't he been snapped up?
Of course he would, yeah.
And why didn't the Russians grab him? Because the Russians had their own program for like a brain drain of German rocket scientists and aviation experts. In 1946, they did the same thing over one particular night in, I think it was October 46. So, you know, why wasn't he snapped up then? You know?
Yeah, he obviously had no value, and they're not
Not
going
at
to
all.
look people over, are they? Exactly.
No, exactly.
Correct. Now, I think we discussed this earlier, but let's just see if there are. Do we have any accounts at all where Foo Fighters fought back, not necessarily with like weapons, but like where they intercepted or pushed people off course or anything like
It's
that?
not necessarily a Foo Fighter in terms of a light, but there was certainly a huge object was seen by a military pilot on effectively one of the last bombing raids of the war. And this is April 1945. So it's an Australian pilot, and he belonged to 9 Squadron. And he's flying in his bomber over Germany, and they're going to Berchtesgaden, which was Hitler's rooftop mountain top fortress. And it was on a raid to there. So this is the end of April 45. And this pilot described this thing as like an army blanket, like a huge army blanket flying past his bomber. And then when this thing flowed past the bomber, now he has a 12,000 pound Tallboy bomb. And that's a single bomb. It's one of these earthquake bombs in his bomb bay. And when this thing flew past the bomber, all electrics in the bomber failed. The actual bomb fell out of its cradle, out of its kind of holding cradle, and smashed through the bomb bay doors and fell away. And then all the engines stopped on the aircraft as well, and the aircraft fell out of the sky. Now he was a former test pilot, and he managed to restart all 4 engines before they actually hit the ground. I think that they were flying at something like 20,000 feet when it happened, and I think they got down to about 7,000 or 8,000 feet when he managed to restart the engines. And they flew back to base because they'd lost the bomb, so they couldn't go on with the bombing raid. And when the whole crew got back to base, they had to go into the base hospital because they were suffering from like headaches, like really severe headaches, and other kind of like, you know, ailments. And one of the gunners had to stay in hospital for weeks, according to the pilot. They were really suffering from they don't know what.
So was it radiation, presumably?
They just don't know. They just didn't know, and the medics couldn't come up with an idea either. So it was really weird. It's just a really weird story. Now that story does appear in my Foo Fighters book. So if anybody's hasn't read it, or they have read it, they'll understand. They'll come across that at some stage.
Yeah, I've not heard of that one before, and that's a cool one because it also reminds you of other times where UFOs, UAPs have turned off like the nuclear missiles and stuff, isn't it?
Well,
All
yeah,
that whole
there
lore.
are stories of that, yes.
Yeah, so I wonder if it's on the same reasoning. Maybe there's something that bomb would have done that would have destroyed some sort of evidence or whatever. Who knows?
Or it's just some kind of byproduct, some kind of after effect from the passing or whatever it is, and it affected the airplane. So who knows?
So that's the nearest thing we had to sort of like direct interaction. Do you think there's no kinetic weapon fire or anything like this?
No, nothing like that. Not as far, nothing I've come across yet anyway.
Quality. Have you looked into other wars, not just World War II? Have you looked into like things like Vietnam or anything like that, or does it not interest you?
I wrote I wrote a book called Flying Saucer Fever, which was to do with pilot and aircrew encounters 1950 1952. So that's bang on the Korean War. So there are accounts from pilots who see strange lights. There are strange radar contacts. And there are objects seen which don't conform to anything that the North Koreans or even the Russians, because obviously they were supporting the Korean Air Force at one time, and also the Chinese as well when they got into that war. Nothing that they were flying or operating, can account for these things either. So yeah, there's intelligence reports from the U.S. Air Force, who were what they call the Far East Air Force, who were based in Japan, who were fighting the war in Korea, and you'll see occasionally UFO reports turn up, and again they're none the wiser as to what these things are. So it wasn't just jet fighter pilots who were seeing them. There were army observation aircraft, the planes that were helping the artillery gunners to find their targets. They were seeing things as well over the battlefield.
It's everywhere, isn't it?
It seems to be. It seems to be. But then
Yeah.
again, we're a warlike race, and if you can imagine some other civilization looking to us, then that might be the kinds of periods they look at, because they see the best and the worst of humanity in times like that. But again, if it's us from the future, it might be the Korean War, might be another stop off on the curriculum. So who knows?
Do you think that's what modern accounts are as well? Do you think you like this idea of the education, this school?
Well, it's plausible, I guess. It's not necessarily I'm gonna nail my colours to the mast on, but yeah, it might simply just be a way of looking back, but it might be something else completely different. Who knows, Paul? I can't say that's what they are.
I know you can't answer, and
I
most people
never
like to be
would
data
anyway.
led.
Yeah.
But I like the speculation side of things because it can lead you down new thought patterns.
It can do, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so we've touched on modern accounts of UFOs because we talked about the gimbal, go fast, and the go fast one's interesting, isn't it? The transmedium. I think that's the one that goes in the water, isn't it?
No,
Is that a different one?
there's another one that came out of one of the ship, the pictures from the ships, and you see it go into the water.
Yeah,
That was a bit more. That was a bit more recent.
Do you know what that one's called? I can't remember.
I'm not sure if it has a name, but it's to do with the it'll be the name of the ship, and that escapes me for the second. You'll also have to forgive me because I was in a car accident last week.
Oh no,
I blacked out at the wheel, so and
really?
I ran off the
Well,
road.
randomly.
Yeah.
Jesus.
So my memory is not as great as it should be for little things. So you'll forgive me for not knowing the name of the video for
No,
that.
that's I understand. Do you know what? I'm just intrigued, and stop me if it's too personal. Do you
No, it's
know
fine.
why you blacked out?
Well, it was a blood pressure drop, but that's the medical
Ah,
side, and it might have been something as simple as gastroenteritis, because I had a real bad attack of it just before I crashed.
crikey.
I
How
was
fast were
feeling
you
really,
going?
really ill. I wasn't going fast at all. I was
Oh,
doing
that's good.
less than 40 miles an hour. But it's very windy roads near where I live up in northern England. And I went off the road at a bend and down a hillside and crashed into a tree. So it
Oh,
wasn't brilliant.
crikey.
But I walked away, so it was fine. It was only
That's
the car
exactly the
slipped off.
sort of crash you see in a movie, isn't it? Always off the road, round a bend, and it's a
Yeah,
tree.
yeah, yeah,
Well, I'm
yeah.
glad you're okay. That's terrible
Yeah,
thing, but
yeah, me too. Thank you. So yeah, I've been putting off interviews, but I wanted to do yours. So forgive me if I'm not being entirely lucid occasionally, but that's the
oh
reason why.
no, you've been more than lucid. Trust me, you're more awake than I am. um, I want to get your thoughts on. I know we spoke about him earlier, but David Grush. I want to branch into the more theories and the
Yeah,
wider
sure.
topics itself. So, what do you think truly about David Grush? Because my thoughts are, there's no smoke without fire.
Mm.
Why would he put his ass on the line? Is something there.
Of course, yeah.
Are you
Um,
on that basis?
I am, yes, and I did briefly speak to him a little while ago,
All right.
before he did all this stuff, when it was known he was going to come forward. I just wished him well. Basically, that's all. I had
Mm,
time for that. It was a brief phone call. He was talking to somebody else who I know, and I just managed to get that sort of shoehorned in the conversation. Having said that, yes, he's a bit like Llewellyn Elizondo in that case. Why would he come forward? Why would he put your reputation on the line? Why would you risk um, breaking like a non-disclosure agreement? And they haven't done that because they're very careful what they can and what they can't say, because you can go to jail over that in America. So it's a case of they can come so far and they can say so much, but until they can be put into a position where they can say things freely, then they have to be very cagey. And sometimes that comes across as being less than honest. And I can understand how some people can think, oh well, they're just not giving us information, or they're talking in riddles. or they're saying things exist, but they're not giving any evidence. So therefore, they're just making things up. So I can see where that argument comes from, but also because I know Lou, and obviously through him I've spoke to David, and also everything else that I've heard from other people about them both. And I've met Lou a few times over the years as well, not just spoke to him, but I've met him a few times. You know that you come to realize that they are the real deal. That they're doing it for a reason. They explain why they're doing it, because they want this information to be out in the public domain. But they're hamstrung because they are under certain restrictions, which means they can't just appear on national TV and say, "This is what we have. This is where it is. These people are holding it. It's this, it's that, it's this shape. It can do this." They might not even know the full extent of it. And in terms of David Grush's case, he's been told a lot of information. He's not necessarily firsthand, kind of evidence. It's things that he's either seen in terms of documentation, or he's learned from other people who have been, involved in all this. But he's passing it on. He's doing his duty as a concerned, American patriot, I guess, as a concerned citizen. He, like you said before, that information should be out there, and why isn't it? It's something that we all should know. Is there a danger involved? Or is it something that's benign? Is it something that could benefit us, or is it something that's dangerous? We should know that. But in terms of the information itself, I can see why they can't give us chapter and verse. And I've been in a room with Lou, with a couple of my colleagues, and we know there's no point in asking him what's going on, because he can't tell us, and we wouldn't disrespect him in that way. So we have more general conversations about things, and in that way you can read between the lines about stuff, and that's how you find things out, or that's how you sort of make your mind sort of change about certain things. But they're very clear about what they can and what they can't talk about, and that's a credit to them, because that's how they have to operate.
Do you think with David's case, it almost seems like an orchestrated release, like he's being not guided or wound up or controlled? It's more like fed, like going, we can now do this, let's do this. It is what you can say, because he's almost talked like that, as to say he's been given permission to talk about this side of things. Do you know what I mean?
I know.
So it's like an orchestrated release by everyone.
I think that we're going to find more and more of them coming out. I mean, maybe not next week or next month, but in the future. And it may just be that he was in the right place at the right time, and he certainly was, because of the access he had and the programs he's worked on. So he is uniquely qualified in that respect to come forward. So it's not necessarily a case of it's kind of a pattern of disclosure. I mean, yes, okay, it might well be, but I think he's somebody who has been in the right position, and he is of that mind that he's wanting to come forward, maybe with some help from some other people who have already come forward, no names, no pack drill, but just that have said, look, it would help if you could come forward. So they're not necessarily the people behind it all. They're just people who have come forward themselves, or think it's more advantageous if he does, because he might kind of blaze a trail for others.
Encouragement then from behind.
Well, exactly, because he stood up in front of Congress. He took an oath. He wasn't laughed out of court. They all listened to him quite respectfully, listened to what he had to say. Nobody has been able to refute what he said. Less people have commented, in various opinion columns and newspapers, to say, oh well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not a trustworthy, kind of guy. You see all that kind of pushback, but actually, when you come down to it, nobody's been able to refute anything he said. But there's not much to refute yet, because we haven't got the hard evidence. That has to come later. But because it's all wrapped up in legal terms, that he hasn't got that much freedom of movement. That's why it doesn't come across maybe as good as it should. That's why it doesn't make national news, because it's not him, coming up with evidence and presenting something in front of the government to say, look, this is what we have.
So that's coming, though, presumably. One would hope.
Presume so. Yeah, I would have thought so. there must be ways that they're trying to look to get that information out. Maybe not directly from themselves, but from them going into what they call these secure compartmentalized rooms where
the
they can
skiffs or whatever
talk.
they call
Yeah,
it.
the skiff. Yeah, where they can talk with elected officials who may be able to attain the same level of clearance, and then they can have a conversation. But it needs things like that to happen. And unfortunately, some of those people in that Congress, in those congressional hearings, they tried to get that kind of clearance and they were denied. So, our money.
Going back around in a circle again. Although I don't think
Yeah,
it's
we
a
are.
circle. I think it's a spiral moving slightly forward with each rotation. But it is that. It is power and it is money.
Yeah,
100% agree. Um, that I think we are in the era though nowadays of more whistleblowers coming forward on everything. I think it's in the mindset of no, let's be truthful for
yeah.
humanity. So I think we have progressed forward. What's it like being in the proximity of someone who in their head they know things that would
Oh,
really excite
it's
you?
weird. It is
I
weird.
bet it is.
And for somebody who never thought they would be kind of ever have the access to people like that, it's also mind blowing on that level. Never mind the fact that I can sit. I sat next to Lou and had a meal with him in London,
Hmm.
like earlier this year, and it's not the first time I've done that. It's really odd. And yes, you have that feeling. It's like, if only I could know what was locked inside your head. But like I say, he's a mate. So I'm not gonna, I would never just go, tell me what it is, because I
Well, he
know he
wouldn't
can't.
respect you for that, would
Well,
he?
no, but he can't tell me anyway.
Yes.
So even if for some way I could get the thumb screws on him, not that that you would, but you know what I mean. He'd never tell you.
Have you actually
So
got any thumb screws?
no, I don't. I'm not that kind of person.
Take them with you next time. But
Yeah.
isn't it weird, right, to know that you were sat there and this guy could have seen, not saying he has, but he could have seen alien beings, he could have seen alien craft, he could have seen all the films, and he sat there. That's so close, yet so far.
I mean, Lou's involvement was as a director of ATIP, so he had access to reports that were coming in
Hmm.
from the military about UFOs. So no doubt he has information about a whole load of stuff that's happened that have never seen the light of day, and either may or may not. And also this kind of footage. Presumably, he's seen that as well. Again, these are things that we just don't ask. And I know I've had criticism in the past from certain individuals who have said, messaged me privately, say, well, why don't you ask him? And I'm thinking, well, where's it going to get me?
Hmm.
I'd rather be just like friends with a guy, and maintain that friendship and not jeopardize it or not just come across as a complete idiot, you know. And yeah, he's really good. He's an interesting person anyway. When you
Hmm.
talk to him, not just about UFOs, but about history and about a whole lot of other things, he's a really interesting chap.
I bet
And
he
a
is.
really
Well,
friendly guy as well.
and you know why they don't say anything. They clearly don't want to get into any trouble and
Well, of
end up in
course,
prison themselves. So
but
you
he
don't
could. Yeah,
blame them.
I mean, he said himself, I could get locked up.
Yeah.
If I step, just one foot over the line, kind of thing. So
And
he's got to be very
exactly.
careful. And he's got a wife, he's got a home, he's got a family. So you can't. It's easy for somebody to say, "Oh, if I was in a position, I would just come out with all the information." Yeah, sitting behind your keyboard, you probably can say that. If you're in his position, you would not. You
And you
definitely
know what
wouldn't.
governments have been guilty of in the past. Let's just assume, right, that the JFK thing, the government did assassinate him, which probably is the case. You know that sort of stuff exists. Yeah, so why would you jeopardize your
Well,
family?
exactly.
You
Yeah, that's right.
absolutely
Yeah,
wouldn't.
information will come out somehow. Information about lots of things always does. It's the time scale of how long it takes. So, whether we get disclosure, capital D, small d, whichever way you want to look at it, whether that happens next year, next 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 100 years' time, it's going to happen at some stage. We'll get some awareness of what this is, whatever it is. And I'm not saying it's aliens. I'm just saying, whatever it is.
But it's aliens.
But
Yeah.
but we don't know how long it's going to take.
Yeah. Well, that was my next question, literally on the list. Where do we think we are in relation to world acknowledgement of the truth? How close are we?
They say the schools of thought that say it's going to be, well, there's been various years bandied about, and 2027 is one of them at the moment, but I don't
Hmm.
understand how they get to these, because that would mean there's a plan in place. And to my thinking, there doesn't seem to be a plan at all, because the information seems to come out piecemeal. There's pushback every time information comes out. There's sometimes trying to discredit the witnesses, or you get Pentagon spokesmen saying that things don't exist when they do. There's a whole load of stuff goes on, and you just think, they're not that clever. They can't keep a lid on stuff. So how can they have this huge program for disclosure? How can you have a year? And I think sometimes people are just pulling things out of their heads, and it sounds good. And some people lap it up. So I'm a bit wary about people who, or when people say, "Oh, yeah, it's going to happen, next year or this year or whatever." It'll happen when it happens.
Which is an honest answer, but I always think the truth will out.
Yeah,
You
me
cannot
too.
keep a lid on truth, because people pass away, truth will come out. It's as
Oh
simple
yeah,
as that.
but it's just when, though. That's the
When?
question. Yeah,
Yeah.
and as I say, next year, 10 years time, 100 years time, I don't know, because the secret keepers, from what we've seen in the past, in terms of being able to bury information and to be able to hide information, to be called it certain things, to label it under secret projects, they've been very good at that in the past. So it's been very difficult to get a hold of information that pertains directly to what's happening.
But it needs to be within our lifetime, Graham.
Well,
It has to be.
I'm no doubt I'm older than you, so definitely, yeah.
I'm coming up 50. I ain't far off 50.
Oh, 57, so I need
you know
to,
what?
yeah.
Yeah. So we're not, closer to birth, closer to death than we are birth. I need
Exactly.
to know. So it has
Yeah,
to be
so
that 5 years.
likewise, mate.
Please be that. If you had to put money on it, and because I'm only saying this because I love the speculation side to things, what would you put the UFO phenomenon down to be? What
Ah,
genuinely do you think it is?
it's not a case of what I put money down, it's what I'd love it to be. I think
Oh, okay.
I'd like it to be the time traveler thing. Because
Oh, right.
I've always been a kind of like somebody who's loved like time travel stories, time travel films. So that floats my boat a bit. So that is not my preferred option, but that would be great if that was true, because that would mean the technology was available. That means I could go back and see World War II for myself. So it's a
Yeah.
personal kind of thing.
That's fair.
Yeah. So yeah, there you go.
That's what you'd put it down to be. Now, let's expand on that. Is it humans going back in time, or is it aliens or a different race that were on
I
this
think
earth
it's
going?
if it is that, it's a big if. If it is that, it's probably us.
Yeah.
Yeah, but who knows? Anything's possible. And is it Arthur C. Clarke who said, it's not only what we imagine, it's what we can imagine. So just all these theories that people come out with, the truth could be something completely beyond that we just can't comprehend.
That we haven't thought of
And
yet. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, or it's simply something that we can't comprehend. It's just, whatever it is just too much for us to figure out. It could blow our minds, physically, if we ever to try and wrap our heads around it. So who knows?
But whatever it is,
Mm.
it's amazing regardless, isn't
Oh
it?
yeah, sure, yeah, and it's something that's kept people's interest for decades now as well. If it was some kind of flash in the pan, then it would be a nice little sideline from the 40s or 50s, and we could forget about it. Oh, that was just a fad. But no, people are still really interested in it nowadays.
Do you think it right? You were obviously you're close to my age. Back in the days
Mm.
when, let's just say 80s, that's an example, right?
Yeah.
Where you would say, "Oh yeah, I believe in aliens,
Mm.
UFOs." You would absolutely be ridiculed, right?
Oh yeah.
Today, that stigma's almost gone. It's out in the open, and to think that the David Grush stuff is almost nearly out in that
Mm.
he says, "Yes, we've got crafts. Yes, we've got alien bodies." That is basically saying all that crap everyone took for years,
Mm.
throw that away. It is real.
Yeah, but there's a blind spot here, though, because whilst people are happy to believe and say they believe in the existence, they don't necessarily believe in that existence,
How do you mean?
that information. So, they have a general concept of, yeah, like people or other civilizations, other races might exist and all this kind of stuff. But when it gets down to, well, is this information that's coming out now, is that real?
I see.
That's when they sort of back away. And that's when you get, because trying to get people to be interested in it, you can't see it on national news. The BBC, when the BBC cover it, it's a bit of a jokey item at the end of the hour. You can tell that the news anchor doesn't really have a clue about what they're talking about. They'll have questions that are being prepared by the staffers, but actually they have no knowledge of really what they're talking about. So you get the same generic questions. They'll have the X-Files music, or there'll be some mention of Little Green Men, all this kind of stuff. You can tell that they're not necessarily interested to the point of, if it was a political story or a social story, that they would be, and they would be a bit more clued up on. There's that lack of knowledge, and that does translate to the general population as a whole as well. They might have a vague kind of like an acceptance of, yeah, these, there's a general like aliens exist, or we can do time travel, all the rest of it. When you come down to specifics, okay, is this going to be real? Did that happen back then? That's when they get a bit more woolly, and that's when they start going, oh well, I don't really know, I'm not interested, and they'll find some other excuse not to talk about it.
Yes. And then, do you know what? It's a sad indictment of our times that things like "I'm a celebrity, get me out of here" has more inches on the BBC
Yeah,
website of
yeah.
data, than this sort of stuff. Which,
And but I mean, there are documentaries which are really good. James Fox, I don't know if you know who he is. And
hmm,
the phenomenon that came out a couple
yeah,
of
that's
years
really
ago.
good. Yeah, I
It's
like
a
that one.
really, really good documentary. Um, my wife's just bought me a pint of beer. That's
Oh, I
really
was going to
nice.
say what that. I thought it was going to be a coffee or something.
It's an Alpierschbacher because we're in the Black Forest in Germany a week before last. So one brought back for me. Anyway, so yeah, there are some really good documentaries out there, and the phenomenon is a really good one. You can imagine the kind of thing if that was on on network TV in the UK. It got a
Yeah.
really big audience, rather than have to find it on Amazon Prime or have to buy it for yourself, for a DVD. And there are other ones as well, but it really, if the BBC could devote the kind of resources they do for just one kind of political story to one of these stories, the UFO story, and actually throw some reporters at it, get some background knowledge, not just the kind of stuff that they do at the moment, and get some proper witness interviews, and then some people to actually discuss it properly rather than just the kind of very flimsy kind of discussions we have when it is covered. It might do, the subject and the population and the readership, the viewers, a bit more of a service. Yeah.
Yes, and I would love to see that. And also, I believe historically, when years ago, the BBC used to have the odd like night of ghosts.
Yeah,
Do you remember that time when they did
I
that whole
do.
ghost
Yeah,
show?
yeah.
And they did a UFO one. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they had massive viewers for that.
Mm.
So there is the appetite
Oh,
there,
there's definitely an appetite for it.
but it
Yeah,
needs
there
to be on.
is.
I don't know why
Yeah.
they, they'll cancel shows that they've ruined. Take an example, Question of Sport. Yeah,
Mm.
that's
Oh,
recent, isn't
yeah,
it? That's
yeah,
been cancelled. Pile that money into something like this, and I bet
yeah.
you they'll see a return on
The
it.
only thing
But
is, I think they're scared there's like a giggle factor because you always get that with these stories. There's always the news always like to make light of these stories. That there's always an angle that it's presumably some kind of editorial decision
But
to
I think
make
that's
light
an
of it.
old angle,
It
isn't it?
still happens though.
It
It
does.
still happens. Yeah, and
But
it's
but I
happened
think
on some of the
go on, you carry
It's
on.
still happening on some of the sorry, it's still happening on some of the recent BBC coverage when they were talking about the congressional hearings, when they were talking about Grush, when they were talking about some stuff that happened beforehand in the last few years. It's always been relegated to the last story before the break for the weather or break for the news
Hmm.
for the news on the hour sort of thing. You can tell that the news anchors are very uncomfortable talking about it. They're always wanting to reduce it to a joke because that's an easy way of dealing with it. And you can tell that they have a bit of there's always a snide little comment at the end, there is that little green men reference or something similar, or an X-Files reference. Sometimes they even put the music in, or they'll talk about it in those terms. You can tell they simply can't wrap their heads around it. They don't have the headspace. They don't have the knowledge to discuss it like they could if it was a story about Boris Johnson's indiscretions or
Hmm.
you name it, or HS2 getting cancelled. The kind of stories that they cover on a day-to-day basis where they're a bit more comfortable talking about it. Because it's something they talk about regularly. When they talk about this, you can tell they're out of their comfort zone, and that's when it descends into a bit of a farce, really. That they just when there's anywhere they can reduce it to humor, that's what they latch onto because that becomes a bit more safe for them,
Yes, I
and they
agree.
can have a bit of joke about it, and then they can just move on. Whereas you don't have that kind of very serious, wide-ranging discussion of what the topic entails.
I think that's definitely a holdover or remnant from a bygone age where people do have that disconcerting feel and deal with it in that way. But I
Yeah,
think the newer generations, they don't really have the stigma or like they shame people for it because I think they believe they just have an apathy for it. They don't
yeah,
care.
maybe,
And
maybe.
so I think when that group of generation of people get into the controlling the media and all that sort of stuff, I think it won't be laughed at the end of the thing. It'll just be a here it is,
Yeah.
and it'll be more of a I don't care about it rather than have a go at
Yeah.
it. So, hey, let's see what happens there. If you never researched UFOs,
Mm.
what other paranormal topic do you think you would have been? Sorry, what would have been next for you if there would have been one?
If there had been one, I mean, I'm not entirely sure there would have been one, Paul, but the one thing I used to be interested in, and not to the point of where I was going to go out and research it, was spontaneous human combustion.
Oh yes, that was quite
SHC.
big at
There
that
was
time.
one that just used to weird me out when I was a kid.
I know the one you
You know,
mean.
you would see these kind of magazine articles. You know, I used to buy 14 times back then as well. And you'd see these pictures like, just legs, like
That's it. I knew you were going to say that.
charred, and you just think, how? But then when you realize about what the human body's made up of, and how it can burn effectively,
Yes.
some of the explanations, some of the more kind of more sensible explanations actually do make a lot of sense. From what I remember, the last time I looked at this, and it was but the whole thing was just fascinating. So yeah, my wife actually listens to Uncanny. Danny Robinson's radio series about ghosts and and I think they had a UFO program that she mentioned, but I haven't listened to yet. But yeah, she's interested in all that kind of stuff. Not to any great degree, but she actually does enjoy listening to them. So I think if you use that as a kind of an idea about maybe what the general public's interested, yeah, they do have a passing interest in all this. It's just trying to get a bit more information to them to make that interest, to galvanize it, to make it a bit more solid, so that they can go, yeah, we need to put pressure on our politicians to come clean. Yeah.
And this is where these sort of things, like his podcast series, mine, and many thousands of other people that do this sort of thing, I think it's getting long form conversation out to people so they can not just live on tidbits which mean nothing to people.
No, sound bites do nothing for the conversation at all. They're great for TV because they're cheap and they don't take up much airtime, but actually they don't get the conversation forward, and they're taken out of context most of the time as well. So yeah,
they have little meaning. So spontaneous human combustion. I know the image you mean as well. It's a black and white of a lady, the leg just below the knee, and she's a granny. I can see it in my head now.
Yeah,
that always intrigued me. Yeah, great subject, that one. You don't see much of it these days, do you?
No, you definitely see so much talk about SHC nowadays. No, definitely.
You know what? It was probably the advent of fire retardant fabrics on sofas.
Quite possibly, yeah.
Probably what it is. A question I ask everyone that I speak to. What strange things have happened to you? It could be seeing a UFO, a ghost, a random weird person in your life that you saw one time or dealt with. What strange thing has happened to you?
A teardrop, an orange and silver teardrop on its side when I was about 12-year-old.
Go on.
That's what I saw. It was.
That's not the end of the story or the beginning. Come on.
So yeah, I was on my own in my schoolyard in a summer holiday. So I was playing in the schoolyard on by myself, and I was looking at the sky as I occasionally did, just looking at the clouds. I had a passing interest in UFOs by that time, obviously. I was reading books on it, and I saw this thing, and it wasn't an aircraft. It wasn't a balloon, it wasn't a microlight, it wasn't a glider, it wasn't an airliner. It was a teardrop-shaped object on its side. It was orange and silver, and then it disappeared behind a cloud, and never saw it again.
How long did you see it for? Was it like going, or was it just slow?
It wasn't going. It was just sitting there.
Oh wow!
It was
better.
It was kind of sort of hovering. It might have been moving, but to a very small degree. But I just remember. I mean, it's obviously quite a long time ago now. So it's 45 years ago. But yeah, it was just this thing that just looked out of place. And that's probably why I latched onto it, because it shouldn't have been there, kind of thing.
Okay, devil's advocate. It wasn't a Goodyear blimp or anything silly like that.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't the right shape. Wasn't the right place or anything like that. So yeah, wasn't the right color.
Yeah, sure.
Shape, size, all the rest of it. And by then, I could tell you, pretty much every type of airplane that landed at Newcastle Airport, which was nearby. I could tell you all the light, even the light airplanes, the types of those, and anything that flew overhead. I was always interested in that kind of stuff back then. So yeah.
Have you ever seen that?
Like that?
Have you ever seen that case corroborated in any like UFO reports anywhere?
No. I tried to find out from some of the people who worked at the tower So sometime afterwards, but there was never any report of it. Newcastle Airport, the controllers of the tower back in the 60s had seen things, at night time, they'd seen strange lights, etc. But they'd never been officially reported as far as I was aware, because again, it was like a kind of, well, we just don't report this kind of stuff.
Lovely. Well, thank you for that one. Graeme, we are now entering the Koit zone.
Koit Zone!
Now, in the Koit zone, I will ask you irreverent, pointless, and often silly questions. So you have to answer these best you can. Now, they mean nothing, but it is what it is.
Okay.
Best place in the world you've ever been?
Northeastern Siberia,
And for what reason?
photographing aeroplanes in 1992.
And why was it so superb?
Because it was a place that no Westerner had ever been to before.
What, you were the first Westerner in that
I
particular
was
region?
one of the first group of Westerners ever to actually arrive at a particular place. Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
I hope you were treated like royalty when you were there.
Yeah, and actually, there's another one I should add to that. I was at Roswell. I was at Roswell earlier this year to speak at a conference, and so going to Roswell was actually quite a great thing as well, with all that entails. Yeah.
Did you go to the little alien?
No, because that's some distance away.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's nowhere near the town. But the town itself is just like, it's got so much UFO stuff around. Every shop has something in the window, has something outside. Dunkin's Donuts has a huge inflatable kind of alien outside.
Quality.
It's an amazing place, and the conference was brilliant as well. So,
which conference was that?
It was the Roswell Daily Records, Roswell Incident 2023. So I was one of the speakers there.
Oh, quality.
Yeah.
Excellent. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek. I'm that age. I was watching Star Trek in about 1975 when it was shown on BBC One. So,
yeah, me too. The reruns, yeah, late on a Sunday night.
Oh, even before that, Monday nights, BBC One.
Mondays, was it?
Monday nights, yeah.
I was of the era where it was Top of the Pops or Star Trek and Top of the Pops, then Bed with Coco.
Yeah,
in pajamas.
That sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah. Quick thing, Star Trek, your best series, is it the original series or are you thinking something different?
Well, yeah, because it's the one I remember the best. But the Next Generation was kind of the one I was sort of, the one where I could watch all of it. You had access to everything. Whereas when the original series, you were at the mercy of what the BBC showed. You didn't have it on VHS and all this kind of stuff. Whereas when Next Generation came along, I collected the VHS cassettes.
On release,
so I had the whole lot.
I did the same thing.
So yeah, Deep Space Nine I didn't enjoy so much. Voyager, yeah, I know, it was just weird.
That's blasphemy, that is.
I like Babylon 5 better.
Oh, I love Babylon 5 as well, but DS9 was my favourite, probably because of the Babylon 5 link.
Yeah. Voyager, I didn't warm to it straight away, but it grew on me. Enterprise, I hated with a passion. I just thought I just couldn't get away with it. And then the recent ones, Discovery was all right. I just felt it was a bit, I don't know, it needed a bit more. And then Strange New Worlds, I think, is really good. I quite enjoy Strange New Worlds.
I also enjoy Strange New Worlds. Discovery, I hated with a passion. As soon as I saw the Klingons, I thought, no, I ain't having that.
Right, yeah.
You've ruined it for me. And then I started watching that lady in control cry all the time. No.
Yeah.
Deep Space Nine for me, but fair play. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Love Star Trek.
Yeah.
If you could eat one thing forever, what would it be?
Oh, mince and dumplings.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a northern thing.
Mince and dumplings.
Mince and dumplings. It's a Geordie thing.
I hope you're saying mince as in MINCE, not like polo mince.
No, I'm saying mince. It's an accent thing as well.
Yeah.
That's a particular kind of Northumberland, kind of Newcastle thing. Yeah,
mince and dumplings.
Mince and dumplings.
I'm going to be quite picky here, because I did say what one thing. Is mince and dumplings one thing, or is it?
It's a meal. It's a meal. So.
Oh, it's a meal deal. Oh, we'll let you off. What's the best thing you've ever found?
Best thing I've ever found. A whole raft of Foo Fighter reports from the Balkans in 1944 that nobody had ever found. They've never been found. I was the person who went through the squadron information and nobody had ever bothered before. So that was kind of unique to me. I found those reports. So if I've got any kind of legacy, that's my legacy, is to find those reports. So I was
Graham, the
really pleased
finder of
about
Balkan reports. Yeah.
that.
I never saw that in your Wikipedia entry or anything.
No, well, I've got a
Not that I
Wikipedia
looked at.
entry.
No, I didn't think you did. I found you on your website, but you're bound to have one. If you haven't, somebody should be writing one.
Well, yeah, please do.
Yeah. Pick an item from your background and tell us the story of it. Now, weirdly enough, you've got a blur on, so I can't actually see anything. But is
Yeah,
there
well,
anything interesting
There's
around
nothing
you?
in this room. I've got a radio set from a T-33 Shooting Star, a Belgian Air Force one, which I took from a bombing range in Cumbria. Or rather, somebody gave it to me from a bombing range in Cumbria. So it was
It wasn't
it was an aircraft target on a bombing range.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I've got a radio set from a Belgian Air Force aeroplane.
Is that the best thing you own?
It's one of the more interesting things I own, but not necessarily the best thing. I would have to think about the best thing, but that's definitely one of the things I don't want to part with.
Your missus will say it's your wedding ring, won't she? So you'll have to.
Yeah, probably. she's not in the room.
You can get away with whatever then. Currently, it's my beer. What's the best tasting fruit flavour?
Raspberry.
Oh,
I like raspberry.
fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. I didn't expect to choose that, but I like that people choose.
Which one do you
things.
think I was going to come up with?
Well, most people tend to choose orange or lime or lemon.
Yeah,
I would think.
Yeah, raspberry.
Not that I've asked that question before. I haven't, but that's just my presumptions. Okay, favorite film.
Okay. The Thing, 1982.
Good film, that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. If you've never seen it, watch it. If you have seen it, watch it again.
I watched it when I was about 9, and I shouldn't have done, but somebody had it on around the house. Yeah.
It's
a good film, though.
Yeah, not the remake, or the prequel or whatever it is. The original one, the 1951, the thing from another world, is interesting, and watch it for comparison. But yeah, the 1982 version of the Thing, John Carpenter.
Far superior. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Nice.
Absolutely brilliant.
Claustrophobic, eerie, and scary at the same time.
And the effects, I mean, sometimes, well, you wouldn't even think they're effects because they're not CGI, they're proper animatronic, all this kind of stuff. And the actual person, the special effects guy, had a heart attack.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, he basically ran himself into the ground.
Who was it? Do you know?
So hard. It was called Rob Gettins, I think.
I don't know that one. Yeah, quality film though. Fair play. Right, here's a good one. You have the power to snap out of existence one food item. What would it be and why?
Celery.
You don't like celery, no?
I know. My wife has a thing that she can hide celery in stews and things, but it has to be so I can't recognise the taste.
So is it a little game between you two, is it?
Yeah, it's been a long running game.
Yeah, the thing is with celery, isn't it all stringy, so you know when it's there?
Now you can chop it fine enough so you can hide it in soups and things like that, and you can't see it, and you can't taste it. It just adds bulk to the soup.
No need for it.
Yeah, whereas I just don't like the aftertaste.
Okay.
It's a bit like gin. I don't like gin too much because of that kind of. It's got a kind of. It's a personal thing.
What do you think about the smell phenomenon, right, versus the taste? Because celery actually has a weird allure to it, I find.
Yeah,
it smells quite nice, but I would never like the taste of it.
I just no, it's a spawn of the devil. Sorry.
That's okay. I don't eat it myself, so I'm with you. Have you ever had a recurring dream?
Yeah, not handing homework in. It's one of those ones that a lot of people apparently have when you're thinking about school and you haven't done your homework.
When was the last time you had that one?
A couple of nights ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa.
It happens every so often. Yeah.
Do you know what it means?
No, I haven't got a clue. It's not something I've ever really dealt with, but I've heard it happens to people. So
okay, not handing in your homework.
It could be worse. It could be one of those.
There's
the ones that you hear about from people are the ones where they're naked in a room or something, like stupid ones like that. That's apparently a common one as well. So
I just do that in real life. It's so much better. Gets a better reaction. If you could change any part of yourself, what would it be?
I'd rather have 20/20 eyesight. I've worn specs since I was about 5. So
wow,
it's a pain in the ass.
What have you got? Long sight or short sight?
I've got short sight.
So you can see close, but you can't see far.
Yeah,
I have that one. I have to have specs for cinema and stuff.
Yeah, it's not brilliant.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. Exactly.
Yeah. You got to see. Is there a film or TV program that lives in your brain so much as you watched it loads, where you could possibly recite the script?
Maybe not recite the script, but in my head I can visualize lots of the scenes. There's the Band of Brothers series.
Oh yeah, that's quality,
Yeah.
that series.
Yeah, yeah. Just a lot. Yeah, I can picture, just so much of it. Yeah, I can. It's almost I don't have to watch it again. But it's just really, really good. I have sat and I've watched it several times.
I've only ever seen it once, but it was a really good series. I probably should watch it again.
Yeah.
And on that basis, there's that. I know you'll know that the Air Force one isn't that coming out very shortly.
Is that the one? Is that the USR? Is that the US Army Air Force one?
I think so. Yeah.
Cruise? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Good.
Right. Yeah.
That's shortly coming out.
No, it was like shortly. Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah, I look forward to that one myself. Can you sing or play an instrument? That sounds like a no.
No.
Is that a no?
That's definitely a no.
Oh, that's a shame.
Sorry.
That's okay. What's your best skill?
Writing, possibly. That's always been something I've really enjoyed doing, and hopefully I'm reasonably good at it. So, yeah, writing.
Cool. Last question in this Koit zone: are you in the right place at the right time? Are you on the right path for you?
I feel like I have. I took early retirement from the NHS after 26 years to concentrate on writing back in 2021. I'd already had the Foo Fighters book pretty much written by the time I left work. And I felt it was the right path, and nothing that's happened since then has dissuaded me from that. So, yeah. Definitely.
Excellent. Quick side question before we put a close to the Koit zone. In the NHS, what did you do?
I helped people get free prescriptions and free dental treatment, that kind of thing.
That
was one of the things I did anyway. I did a whole load of other stuff, but that was one of the things I ended up doing. Yeah.
Lovely. Good. Thank you for participating in the Koit zone.
Okay.
Last two questions. What else do you like to do in your downtime? Any activities, stroke, guilty pleasures?
Yeah, I do a lot of walking because I live in Weardale, so it's quite an upland area of northern England. So with lots of lovely walks around here. Yeah, and I like to travel. So I've just been back from Black Forest in Germany. So yeah, I'd like to do that as well. So that's what I do in the downtime.
Now, walking in northern England, is it near Northumberland? Is it?
I'm in County Durham.
Oh, okay. I go to County Durham every now and again. What's it like walking around there? Is it just bleak, or is it loads of great walks like forests?
It depends on where you are. Yeah, if you're on the hilltops, then it's quite open. But the dale itself is quite wooded. It's got quite a lot going for it, so it's quite nice. And I've got lots of favourite walks around here in the village where I live, so it's lovely.
Yeah, we always go down south because of it's likely to be hotter, but
maybe
I'll consider going up north for some.
We occasionally get hot days in summer, but you wouldn't want to come up this time of year because it's bloody freezing.
No, every time I come up to County Durham, it's always grey and grim. Yeah, I don't know why, but it is. Last question: what are you currently working on?
I'm currently working on a sequel to the Foo Fighters book.
Oh, lovely!
It's called Shadows Over the Reich. So I have found a whole load of other sightings reports, and I'm digging through intelligence reports at the moment. In fact, I was doing some of that just before I spoke to you this evening. So yeah, that's what I'm working on, and that hopefully will come out later next year.
Oh, excellent! Well, I look forward to seeing that one.
Yeah, I've just finished a book on pilot and aircrew encounters from 1955 and 1956, and that should be out within the next month or so. So yeah,
excellent.
Busy boy.
Busy indeed. Well, look, thank you ever so much for your time, Graeme.
You're welcome, Paul.
It's I appreciate you coming on and spending your time with us. What I would suggest is anyone who's enjoyed this conversation, please look in the description to this video. Links to Graeme's site and books will be there. If you like what you heard, go and buy his books. Yeah, there's shed load more information in there than we've covered tonight. Other than that, I will say thank you for coming on and goodbye, everyone.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. To watch other KoitCast episodes, please click the image top left. To subscribe to my channel, please click the image top right. Please like and share to help KoitCast grow, and most importantly of all, please click the notification bell so you never miss an upload.